Paul, welcome to coming on the podcast. And for listeners who may not be familiar, what is 1,000 Friends of Florida, and what is the core mission of the organization?
1,000 Friends of Florida was founded in 1986 by a group of leaders that included Nathaniel Reed, who was one of Florida's great conservation leaders, and Dr. John DeGrove, who was considered the father of growth management in Florida. It was founded a year after the seminal Growth Management Act of 1985 was passed under Governor Bob Graham. And that was the law that required local governments to establish growth management plans and make those plans enforceable. So 1,000 Friends of Florida was created to be a watchdog on that law and on the growth management process. In general, the growth management process, that was 40 years ago. It's evolved significantly since then. It's very much a moving target, but that is still the primary focus of 1,000 Friends, is to monitor, to defend, to promote the growth management process, the concept that local leaders and their constituents need to have a process that gives them a say in charting the development and growth of their communities, how their communities will evolve, the character of their communities. There is a state role in that as well. The legislature is basically making the rule book for local governments to observe. So we spend quite a bit of time monitoring the legislature and weighing in when they propose changes to the local growth management process. But we're about managing growth. We're not about stopping growth. Florida is a fast-growing state and has been for decades. But we see, if through proper planning, that growth can be an asset if it doesn't have unnecessary negative impacts on our environment and our quality of life in Florida. So we try to pay attention to all those elements of the growth management process.
So just looking at your website, you have a number of, I would say, focus areas or roles, maybe services. You want to take a couple of those and talk about how you guys break those down and operate? Because I know some of it's in transportation, some of it's in resiliency. I know you've done work over in Escambia County on the estuary program. So how does that break down within the organization?
These are, we actually, for a statewide organization, we have a pretty small staff. Counting me, we have 7 people on staff right now. So we gladly work with partners in areas around the state. We work with academic partners like the University of Florida for that Escambia County project that you mentioned that dealt with not only future growth and development in Escambia County, but also the impact on water quality of future growth and development there. We worked with the estuary program, which provided funding for it. We worked with another NGO called Healthy Gulf. But getting back to the broader question, we work in or focus on these different areas where growth can have impacts, or for example, you mentioned transportation. Transportation choices are one of the primary dictators of how we grow, where we put highways, where we fund and enhance mass transit. And water quality is going to be impacted by how we grow. So we look at water quality as well. We regularly engage, correspond with other conservation organizations. There aren't too many organizations like us that are primarily focused on the growth management process, but how we grow has a lot of environmental impacts. So we work with a lot of environmental nonprofits, and so we look at water quality. We have done a lot lately on preserving agricultural land, because if we don't do a good job in planning, if we sprawl outside of urban cores, often we end up losing agricultural land, which has consequences not only for our environment but also our economy. So we've been working with some groups that are focused on maintaining the agricultural sector in Florida. It's the second biggest sector after tourism in our economy. So all of those areas that you mentioned are all areas where growth policy can have a positive or sometimes, unfortunately, a negative impact, depending on which direction we go.
So, I mean, that's a range of issues and topics, but I guess you're sort of what steers you is how we grow, but what actually drives us? Do y'all have a strategic plan? Because it's easy to be reactive given all the different types of bills that get filed every year. So
Sure.
What really dictates your priorities over the next couple of years?
Yeah. And it's funny that you would ask about our strategic plan, because we're just in the process of updating it now. But it basically lays out three goals that we prioritize. One is to educate and empower Floridians to meaningfully and effectively engage in the growth management process. I mentioned, even though we're a statewide organization, we're small. We've got 7 staff members. So we need to educate and empower ordinary Floridians to act as kind of force multipliers for us in the growth management process. And that usually means not up here at the Capitol, but before their city or county commissions as growth issues, growth proposals come up or growth policies come up. So that's one goal. Another goal is to actually increase civic participation, and that is to be watchdogs for the process and make sure the process is transparent, to make sure it's receptive to people who want to get involved and participate, to make sure the information about LPA meetings, land planning agency meetings, and city and county commission meetings are available, to make sure we interact and connect with local planning staff to assist in that process. And the third part of it is the advocacy part of it. It's the work we do up at the Capitol, but it's also the work we do in selected city and county commission meetings where there may be a policy or a proposal that has an impact on an asset of regional or statewide importance, or that might establish a precedent in one county or one city that could end up being applied to other counties or cities, either, again, in a positive or a negative way.
So, Paul, some of the things you've just listed, have actually been hampered somewhat by the legislature over the past several years, beginning back in 2011. And I guess my question is, for you and your members, is there a sense that the sky is falling, that we're not going to be able to get back some of the original intent and authorities that both the state and the local governments had with respect to growth management?
I don't think the sky has fallen. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the DCA days. But I think it's just become more difficult to control the course and character of development. There are fewer options to challenge policies and proposals for citizens than there used to be. And one of the ironies in the process was 2011, the Community Planning Act was supposedly to remove the heavy hand of state government and growth management. But since then, the legislature has taken away more authority on autonomy for local governments to make decisions. The walls are kind of closing in the way the legislature has operated the last few years. I mean, one of the most egregious examples right now is Senate Bill 180 that was passed in the last session, which was supposedly a law to help communities and Floridians recover without interference after hurricanes, but ended up telling local governments throughout Florida that they can't really do much to update their comp plans or their land development codes for the next 3 years.
Yeah, that's that's an amazing thing, and even the sponsors indicate they weren't necessarily understanding how wide scope that was. So we know there's a couple of fixes, but it doesn't fix everything that's been filed. Senator Gates has one of those bills, but it really addresses just the 3 named storms and not the issues going forward. So
Right.
That's a wait and see, and I hope that does get addressed appropriately.
What we really need to narrow that bill is we need the law to do what sponsors of the bill have said that it was supposed to do, which is be targeted at hurricane-damaged property within hurricane-impacted communities. And if it was narrowed to that extent, it would be a lot more palatable. There is the bigger question of whether or not, and it's a tougher political question, of whether or not you should endlessly rebuild hurricane-damaged property after every storm. But it's hard to tell a Floridian that he or she can't rebuild their home after it's damaged in a hurricane.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly seeing that down in Pinellas County and St. Pete Beach and some of those areas.
Right.
They've got a big challenge ahead of them on whether or not they can comply with, floodplain management ordinances and elevate some of those older properties and whether funding is available. Well, let me go back a little bit on. We were talking about the changes since 2011. Has any of those changes affected the way A Thousand Friends has done its work, or is it basically, has your mission's been kind of basically the same? You guys have just sort of have pivoted with the changes over time.
Yeah, we've done our best to pivot with the changes over time, but I think it's made our work more challenging. I think in some of our work prior to 2011, the state DCA had our back on some of the policies that we promoted, and that's gone. So we just work with the power of our hopefully our ideas, but we don't. We can't point to the state and say, DCA says you can't do that, because that's not there anymore.
If a local government has an issue, or let me ask you this: how do issues come to your attention? If it is something of regional importance or local importance, do people reach out to you, or are y'all kind of monitoring some of these issues across the state?
Yeah, we do our best to monitor issues, but we hear almost every day from people around the state who are concerned about development policies or development proposals in their communities. They reach out to us, and often we're a sympathetic ear to them and share the information and guidance that we can on what options might be open to them through the planning process. But we simply don't have the resources and the capacity to heavily engage. And from the perspective of someone in a community, the objectionable proposal for them may be huge, may pose a huge threat to their quality of life, but it's just not big enough for us as a statewide organization to engage. So we talk to them about their options. Sometimes they ask for land use lawyers, and we've got a list of land use lawyers that we're aware of that we can refer them to. But in terms of our drafting comment letters or our showing up at county commission or city commission meetings, we have to be fairly selective because we just don't have the people to do that and the money to do that. Some major issues like the EAR process for right now, I'm on an advisory task force for Miami-Dade County's EAR process. I accepted an appointment to that from the mayor of Miami-Dade County. I mean, you're talking about the most populous county in Florida. That's an obvious area where, when asked, we would engage just because of the stakes. Not only the fact that it's Florida's most populous county, but it has the Everglades on one side of the urban development boundary and Biscayne Bay on the other side. Huge environmental assets. And also how they navigate this issue has the potential to set precedents for environmentally sensitive areas all over Florida. So getting engaged there is a no-brainer. The other day, we heard from somebody who was upset about some local tennis courts being converted to pickleball courts because of the noise that it was going to create in the community. Obviously, like I said, that's very important to them. If it means it's no longer pleasant to sit outside on their porch, I feel for them. But is my organization of 7 people trying to keep up with 67 counties and 411 municipalities and 23.5 million people going to engage on that? Probably not.
Yeah, pickleball courts. Let me ask about. We were talking about a bill that's going to be heard this week, and it's I'm not afraid to call what it is. It's the Blue Ribbon Project, right? So it basically is a process that has the effect of circumventing all local review, citizen input, permitting, what have you. It's not very well written, in my opinion, but the first thing that came to my mind is what's already in law, which is sector planning.
Right.
Which has, and I didn't realize this, but maybe I should have. It's, started out as a pilot program in the late 90s. And so it's been around for about 25 years. And I think it works well when you have 1 or 2 landowners. So I'm thinking of the real one that I'm familiar with is the one over in Bay County, All St. Joe.
Right.
There's one over in Escambia that I've been reading about that I think they're a little reticent on that one now, and they're kind of backtracking because it's not a single property owner, it's hundreds and hundreds of smaller property owners. So, do you have any experience or any thoughts on how the sector plan process has been implemented in Florida? Because the only one I'm really familiar with is Bay County because it's close.
Right. I've heard that it appears to be well suited for Bay County for that particular property. I think that we don't need an alternative to that. We don't need for something that has that potential huge impact like the so-called blue ribbon projects. We certainly don't need to be turning it over to administrative appeal, and the public meeting and public comment are both mechanisms that ultimately, if you believe in those principles, will produce better policy, more enduring policy, have fewer unintended consequences. So any proposal, whether it's that proposal for the blue ribbon projects or whether it's proposals for smaller areas that are now pending, so-called infill residential development, or development of agricultural enclaves, administrative approval in those, I think, is not good policy and is going to create more problems and more unintended consequences, unwelcome surprises in the future.
But the other side says that this simply just drags out the process. In other words, I've got to have all these hearings. I've got all this community input. Nobody likes this project because they don't like developers. So what's the response to that? Because that's what we hear.
Sure. I would say that anything that results in irreversible changes to a community that may involve the conversion of hundreds, or in the case of blue ribbon projects, literally thousands of acres, should be somewhat cumbersome. If it has to be drawn out, you're not going to reverse it once it's done. So you might as well bend over backwards to give the opportunity to people to weigh in on things. I understand the whole NIMBY argument, and we elect public officials to navigate those tough decisions, and to decide whether or not opposition is coming from a minority that's opposed to any sort of development, or whether there's legitimate concern that goes beyond that, whether or not something might not be good for the community overall.
It's a great answer. I like it. I wrote a couple bullets down. I think maybe just finally, do you want to mention just a couple of the projects that y'all have worked on over the past year or two? Or
Sure. One thing I'll mention, because it's coming up later this week, the week that we're speaking, is one of our webinars. We're going to be talking about complete streets, which is a concept that listeners may be aware of. That's generally applied in urban areas to make roads friendlier to bicyclists and pedestrians, not just for vehicles. But I mention that because that's part of our broader webinar series that we run fall to spring every year. We do once a month. And when I mentioned our goal of educating and empowering Floridians, one of the ways we do that is through these webinars once a month. We get hundreds of people listening to them, and they provide information on cutting-edge planning and conservation issues. Earlier I mentioned academic partners. In the last couple of years, we've worked with the University of Florida Center for Landscape Conservation Planning to do a couple of major reports on the impact of population growth, development patterns, and sea level rise on future land use across Florida. How are those variables going to affect our land use? How much rural and agricultural land is going to be converted? We did a general report in 2023, and then 2024, last year, we focused more specifically on the impact of those variables on agricultural land, how much agricultural land we might lose if we continue to grow at our current pattern, or to develop at our current pattern based on population growth projections. And then if we grew in a more compact way and got a little more ambitious in preserving conservation land, how much agricultural land and conservation land we might save. We built in sea level rise because over the next 30, 40 years, we're going to lose something like 1.7 million acres if you look at the federal projections for sea level rise. And that's going to, over time, force the relocation of 900,000 Floridians. That's going to create a lot more development pressure in the interior of Florida, where a lot of our undeveloped natural and agricultural land is. So we need to be planning for that. And these couple of reports sketched out a couple of scenarios. One, if we continue status quo. The other, if we put a little more effort into filling in our urban areas through infill and redevelopment. And pick up the pace in conserving natural and agricultural land.
Excellent. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Well, first of all, thanks again for the opportunity. We would love for county leaders throughout Florida to consider us as a resource, to support them in their planning responsibilities, to provide them with information that might be useful as they carry those out. And we appreciate everybody who has dedicated himself or herself to public service, because it's not an easy job. There are a lot easier ways to build a career, to make friends, and we're just glad that people step up for that kind of public service.
All right. Thank you.